rapid rise.
You do not promote a person from a private in 10 years to a general. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. There is no doubt that on the surface of it, everything points at something basically wrong with the way the president has been handling the issues of his son.
President Museveni has been in power since 1986. He changed the Constitution in 2005 to remove term limits. General Sejusa was asked if he fears for his life.
It's not only my life which is in danger, but the lives of many leaders in that country, because the political system has broken down. There is anarchy and there is panic and there is fear within the political fabric of the state. And the only way to rein in all these upcoming voices of dissent is through force.
Been reports, in fact, I saw one in the London Times Monday that some agents of the Ugandan government were trailing you.
I'm safe as any person who is standing up to a regime run amok could be, but it could be worse. What about all those people who are languishing in jail, others who have died and left behind their dear ones? So I would say really, this is just a small price to pay for freedom. No. In any case, the idea of safety is also relative, because all people who are struggling, or even those people who think that they are very safe with bankers, the way they end up does not always show that security is on their side. So it's also a relative scenario, really. So I think I'm safe in the circumstances.
Now, General,
and I'm happy where I am.
Now, General, this might, of course, sound a little bit ironic, because there are some people, in fact, who look at you and say, you know, you used to be the hunter, and now it looks like you are the hunted. If that were to be true, how does it feel for you, really?
That's a good question. That's a good question. In a way, you are right. In a way, you are right. But what I must say is that hunting has differences. There is a illegal hunting. Even if it was hunting, you hunt according to the law. But then when you start hunting outside the law, you are called a poacher. You cease to be a hunter.
Interesting.
So while I was doing my job, I was doing my job within the precepts of the law. I never broke the codes of conduct or the rules and the operational procedures, contrary to what is happening now, where you have a regime going to other capitals of other countries, trying to look for people and to harm them. So I think that is a different scenario, and I think I should be absolutely differentiated from that type of hunting.
If I remember correctly, General, as a young man, more than 30 years ago, you went to the bush under the leadership of Ugandan incumbent President Yoweri Museveni. And the argument at the time was that you guys were actually liberators. You were fighting to restore democracy. You came back in '86, seized power, as it were, and since then, President Museveni has actually been saying that he brought democracy to the people of Uganda. As a matter of fact, his spokesman, Tamale Mirundi, is on record saying that Uganda now has total democracy. So, would you agree or disagree with some of those statements by your former commander-in-chief?
Well, it's not the first time in history that we have got people who have sold out and subverted the ideals for which they stood for in the past. There is no doubt that the reasons which took us to the bush in 1980, 81, up to 86, was to liberate our people from the regimes of terror of the time. Unfortunately, with time, we have ended up doing exactly what we went to fight against, including abuses against our people, including incredible corruption, including breaking of constitutional rule, including real abuse of power, because the highest mode of corruption is abuse of power, be it personal power, be it state power. These are the things you see at play. I saw some of the captions you showed, how the opposition leaders are being handled, how senior leaders of the movement now are in exile, how people are dying, and you see how parliament is being subverted. So the situation, but it's not the first time that you have some of these instances, especially when you have a leadership which has overstayed in power. There is nothing surprising about that. After all, Judas was the most trustworthy disciple. As you know, he used to keep the money. He was the financial controller, but you know how he ended up. Mm-hmm. So there is nothing new about that. This is the scenario we have in Uganda today.
Now, General Sejusa, you are probably one of the fewest insiders, really, as it were, that has since split with the movement government, as it were, again, under President Yoweri Museveni. I guess the logical question would be, why now? You've been with Museveni since the early 80s up to this year. Why now? And in fact, looking at your record, back in 1997, you tried to leave and didn't leave. Why should people trust you now that you are really serious and you are ready to take on your former commander-in-chief?
Yeah, thank you. You see, you are right, because those are the occupational hazards of serving a dictatorship. Ultimately, you are stuck in there, and your credibility suffers. But as you have pointed out, my history speaks for itself. It's not the first time that I'm moving out. I've been standing to this regime in some of its excesses. I did so in the Constituent Assembly, you remember, in 1994-95. It brought me a lot of problems. I stood up. By the way, these are public, times when I stood against the regime publicly. I'm not talking about quietly within the relevant fora and so on. And then I stood against the regime in 1996, 97, when I went to court. And I was actually conscripted and put back, as is wont of Mr. Museveni, that you must stay in the military until maybe you die in the military, or until you are useless to do anything, or threaten his power base. So it's not the first time, but at that time why I went back is that we had, during the constitutional process, we had put their term limits. And therefore, President Museveni would have served up to 2006. At worst, actually, some people thought he would only stop 2001. But 2005, he did, as usual, renege again on the promises he had made and changed the constitution. So maybe you are right. It was a failure on my part of judgment. I should have done what I'm doing today. I should have done it in 1996, 97, and 98, become an outlaw, in quotation marks, and gone to exile or gone to fight the regime as I'm doing now, resisting it in whatever form. But I must say that this is not the first time. But when you are resisting a dictatorship or someone who abuses his power, you are a captive within that system, such an extent that you must be held by that collective guilt. And this is the unfortunate part, even with those comrades who are still at home and trying to serve the dictatorship. They must know that the brand will somehow hang over around their necks So you are right in a way. But
see.
yes, this is not the first time.
You're most
I have
welcome, sir.
I will talk briefly about, you see, going into the different excesses that have been committed is really to address the wrong issue here, be it the Black Mamba, be it the abuse of the political leaders from the opposition and so on. It all boils to abuse of power by the person in charge of state affairs. The person who asked me about the raid on the High Court, I wish to inform him that the Chief Justice is the third seniorest person in the country, in hierarchy of power in the country. No one can raid a High Court without the express authority and instruction of the highest office of the country. It never happens. No one can raid. It's like raiding the State House. You cannot raid Parliament because Speaker is the second in hierarchy to the President, politically. Chief Justice is third. Therefore, we all know where the abuse originates. There is no question about that. So I wouldn't want to go into that these were coming from military intelligence, these were coming from, that is irrelevant. As long as there is a dictator who is in charge and abusing power, there is no, because you say a leader must account for the power they hold. If you don't, then abuse of power takes different forms. You can raid a court, you can abuse political leaders, you can steal people's property. People, they cannot get the justice within the political, rather the legal regime. So it takes different forms. Therefore, I wouldn't want to.
But General, yes. What about a very ordinary person, frankly, looking at this thing called the government? How do you convince that person that there is only this one man? For example, in the case of Uganda, a one General Yoweri Museveni, retired, but certainly not tired in any way at all, that he's the only guy that calls the shots. What about the generals surrounding him like you?
Yes, that is an important point too. You see, that is the real crisis of the African neo-colonial state. Its structure, the structural behavior of the African state. That's the challenges even when you talk about issues of democratization, issues of accountability, issues of control. There is no way, if a system does not run on systems, on defined modes of operation, there is no way it can check power of an individual. It is known world over. It's been tested and known. Like your colleague has said in the studio, once a system runs on patronage, runs on a neat family, cabal of people, and then uses all corrupt methods of sustaining power, including force, including bribery, including trickery, really. There is no reason for, I can give you many examples, as you know, that anyone who has tried to speak out, be him a general, be him a member of the cabinet, has had to be dealt with. Either they frame charges against him, or they will arrest him, or they will get another way of dealing with him. Therefore, when you say one person, a system evolves where it's no longer a person, but it's people who think there is nothing that can be done about it. So they join the bandwagon. And those are very many, even now. That's why you see not everybody is going, because the cost is very high. If you speak against some of these issues or some of these abuses, then you face an existential threat. So it is true, he has a system which he has woven over time, a system of power, even of corruption, because as we speak now, corruption has generated a power center of its own. You cannot say that anyone can just remove it, but it has become a system of political management. Corruption in Uganda now is a mechanism to manage the country politically.
2013, that was 2001. Do you have a professional army now in Uganda?
The problem of professionalizing the army in Uganda is a non-starter. The question of professionalization is not like quantum physics, something which is difficult to comprehend. Way back in BC, people like Hammurabi of Babylon had already codified how you can professionalize. So you can see there are specific tenets which can be fulfilled in order to determine whether an institution is professional or not. It's not only on management, it also extends actually in issues of accountability, doctrine, national security policy, like in terms of the army, training, promotion, deployment, benefits, a lot of things. So actually what we have in Uganda is unprofessionalizing the army, because a professional army, among other things, is its outlook. It must subscribe to civilian authority. It must not be partisan. These are some key tenets, the key tenets of a professional army. Today, as we speak, I can give you an example. Shaka, you find that a former chief of defense forces was removed from command. And he has been appointed, for instance, a minister of internal affairs. But the articles of the constitution, like 208 and so on, are very clear. The army, UPDF, is non-partisan. Yet a minister is an implementer of a partisan manifesto of the ruling party. But you see, you can't do anything because there is no constitutional rule, there is personal rule. If you go, I can tell you that as we speak today, my view, for instance, today, how do you retire from the army? Who promotes who? How do you access training? Who determines on the welfare? These are issues which professionalizing the army handles. Well, and they must be codified.
So what is the way forward? What is the way forward? If you were to respond to the gentleman from South Africa, what is the way forward? How do you remove what you call a dictator in Kampala?
Of course, the way forward is, first of all, the people of Uganda have long known this, that there has been a retrogression. There's no doubt about it, that the country is moving backward. The professor there told you, HIV/AIDS had fallen 5%. In some cases, it's back to 30 now. We can no longer talk. We had talked about universal primary education. Because of corruption, schools have collapsed. We had excelled in immunization. Health services have collapsed. We were talking about security. Roadblocks are back. And arresting people, you know what we call pandagari. You come and gather children and wives at midnight, take them for screening. This is what Obote was doing in Rwanda and so on. They are all back. Therefore, these issues are not new in Uganda anymore, but they were not exposed to the international community, whom Mr. Museveni has learned to play.
I see.
Because yes, absolutely, because he identifies their interests, because countries pursue their national interests.
We'll come to that.
He's absolutely right, but I would want to inform Mr. Kizito and the other listeners that it's not so obvious to be retired from the army. For instance, when Dr. Besigye retired, it was like an error. It was like an error in 1993 after he wrote that article. And then later on, he was about to be court-martialed. And then he went on to challenge President Museveni in electoral politics. It has become extremely difficult to have anyone leave the military. You can only leave the military in 3 ways, maybe in Uganda. Maybe if you are dead. We had a person called Ezaruk who died at 90, at 80, and he was still a serving officer. And there are men of that nature. Or if you are too old or too sick to challenge Mr. Museveni's projects of power, or if you can do his bidding, if he can release you from the army, you stand in an electoral position and you canvass support for him. But if you have your other ideas, you'll never leave that army. Therefore, that answers the question of Mr. Kizito. Why now? Because even those ones who retired at that time, it was by default. And later on, a decision was taken by Mr. Museveni that retirement right now. That's why now he's finding it very difficult to retire General Ronda.
So how do you deal with him, General? Time is not our best.
We shall deal with him. We are dealing, first of all, it is increasing the consciousness of our people and giving them hope.
Civic
that
education.
Change is possible. Yes, education, that change is possible. Secondly, it is to stand up to these abuses. People must start knowing that the long-term cost of not standing up the long-term cost is very painful and it cannot be avoided.
I see.
The country will ultimately collapse. There